I will be one of the first people to acknowledge that we are to generally obey Christians, people in general, but Christians in specific are, meant to observe largely and obey the rules of the land, of whatever country you're in. I'm not saying that has to happen in every situation, and I sort of want to talk about that today on the subject of obeying authority on the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host, I'm Kurt, and today is Tuesday the 25th of January of 2022. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloutHub, CLOUT Hub, on Minds.com, MINDS.com, and on Locals if you happen to be finding me there. Remember, Rumble is my preferred platform, though these days I'm a little bit more expectant that I'm going to get people seeing me on various other platforms, so that's not as big a thing to me today as it has been. And again, the subject for today is obeying authority, and I want to go through my notes because it is sort of the baseline for what we're going to talk about today. There's a biblical idea that many folks have expressed with regard to Christians and authority. It's actually pretty well encapsulated in a biblical passage. Here is that passage. It is Romans 13. And I'm going to go ahead and read it for those of you that are not seeing me, who are hearing me. Let every soul be subject unto higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that are are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And I'm going to stop there. That was, I think, Romans, let's see, let me make sure I've got the right thing. Romans 13, 1 through 7, that I just read for you, and that obviously you could see on the screen while it was there. There are some interesting questions that come out as a result of reading this passage. The first is, are authorities always of God? That question is an important one because if they are, it would seem we're called to obey every authority. That would mean the communist Chinese regime, for example. The second is, are we called to obey every command of earthly authorities? I think Jesus, Peter, and Paul himself answered this question. That was Paul who wrote Romans, so answer this question admirably in their actions. None of them obeys an earthly sword bearer when they're asked to do something that's against their beliefs. This is to the point that Jesus is crucified by such folks, and Peter and Paul end up in jail cells at times, among other things. None of these results is the sign of blind obedience. The third is, who are these authorities? I've pointed out something about this question a number of times. That would be, nowhere does the passage in question talk about the people we just discussed or any other Christian being an authority. To be clear, that's not to say they can't be, but it doesn't say that they are or that they seek to be that. In fact, even though Jesus had ultimate authority to take mankind by the hand while on the planet, he didn't do so. Nor did Peter or Paul step into such a position as far as we're aware. Paul was in such a position before he became a Christian and basically lost that position afterwards. All three of these questions are important. That's why I wanted to discuss them on today's edition of the Daily Summation. So, Our questions were, do we obey all authority? And I would say, so long as it's within conscience, the answer is yes. So long as it's within conscience, the answer is yes. The second question is, are all things required of us by those authorities things that we should obey, essentially? The answer to that, in my view, is no. And I think we can say that because we can look at what Jesus did, the fact that he said what he said and did what he did while he was on the earth, and it literally cost him his earthly life when that happened. The same thing is true for Paul. The same thing is true for Peter. The same thing is true for Stephen, though Stephen was killed not so much by authorities, and in some senses it could be argued that they were. But nonetheless, the same thing is true for so many people who died as a result of, I think, John the Baptist was beheaded. So, not John the Baptist, but John the Revelator, the other John, was beheaded. I don't know what happened to John the Baptist for sure, but the point is all of these people apparently did things that were in some sense against the legal authority. And if they just have the right to say something to you, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to be this, you're going to be that, hey, guess what? Those people flouted authority. Now, again, if you ask me whether or not that should be a normal thing, the answer to that is, well, no. I think normally if you think that something is within conscience, that you can do it and still maintain conscience, you should do it. That's how that should work. That said, I think that there are times when, even though you are disobeying authority, if you're doing it in conscience, it is the correct thing to do. It's that simple. Now, I wanted to talk finally about this idea of who the authorities are or were. I have had people recently say that as a Christian, I should seek to be one of those authorities. And my answer to that is, I'm not saying that a Christian cannot do that or should not do that if he or she feels so called, but I will say that there's no sign in what Paul did, in what Peter did, in what Stephen did, in what John the Revelator did, in what Jesus Christ himself did that indicates that you should attempt to take up authority. There's no thing anywhere there. Now, to be fair, there was a fellow who was a centurion or a legionnaire, I forget, I think a centurion, and he became a Christian, and he, as far as I know, maintained his position while he did that. I'm not saying it's impossible for a Christian to be a leader, but I am saying that if you look at the bigger, more important examples of who should and who shouldn't be a leader in the time that this passage was written, you will realize it's not apparent that those people believed that that was a reasonable thing. So, question 1, are all authorities of God? I can't really answer that question. The answer that Paul seems to give is yes, but I can't answer that question. Question 2, should we or should we not obey every ordinance of man blindly? My answer to that is, I think Jesus himself and Paul, who wrote the piece of scripture in question, answer that question for you by the fact that they got, quote, in trouble and found themselves in chains and in jail. Now, both of them can argue that they really didn't do anything wrong. Both of them can argue that. But the point is, leaders, if they can rule by edict, which the people of Paul's time and of Jesus' time could rule by edict, can just say you're wrong and that's it. And if you're not obeying them by not preaching that Jesus fella, then you've broken the law and you suffer the consequences. So this is kind of what I'm trying to get across. And that third point was, I don't think that there's anything that indicates that Christians ought to be seeking to be leaders. I don't think that that's true, in case you're wondering. So that's kind of what I wanted to say today. So this has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt, and today is Tuesday, the 25th of January of 2022, moving ever closer towards that middle of the week, which will be Wednesday, the 26th of January of 2022, obviously. Thank you for everyone who's been here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloutHub, on Locals if you happen to find me there, and also on minds.com if you see my content there. Remember that you can give me a boxing glove or a rumble on Rumble, or a plus or a minus also there to show that you like or don't like my content. You can give me a like or dislike on whatever platform you happen to be viewing me on if you want to do the same. If comments are available on a given platform where my content has been placed, you can comment, and I will do my best to read that comment, whatever it is, and do what I think is appropriate as a result of having done so, of having, quote, consumed that content, or that comment, excuse me. And that includes reply if I think that it's a good thing. I hope that you're having a good day today. Obviously, I hope that everything is going well for you. I hope this new year, as this first month begins to wrap up, becomes a good, or is a good thing, has been a good thing for you. And I would love it if you would visit me again on Wednesday's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This podcast was recorded on Tuesday, January 25th of 2022. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.